And joining us now on the debate in Washington, D.C., Danielle Crittenden, contributing blogger at the Huffington Post and FromForum.com. And Matthew Continetti, associate editor at the Weekly Standard and author of The Persecution of Sarah Palin, How the Elite Media Tried to Bring Down a Rising Star. In our nation's capital, Sheila Copps, the former Deputy Prime Minister of Canada. And here in studio, Theo Caldwell, regular contributor at the National Post and the Toronto Sun, and Jonathan Kay, comment pages editor and columnist at the National Post. Good to have everybody alongside us in the provincial capital, in our national capital, and in the American capital tonight. I want to just start by reading a little excerpt from business columnist David Carr of the New York Times to set the table for our ensuing discussion. Here we go. When Sarah Palin made her debut as the host of Real American Stories on Fox News on Thursday night, April 1st, she described several triumphs of regular people over insurmountable odds, but she missed an obvious one, her own. She quit her day job and proceeded to become a one-woman national media empire with the ratings and lucre to show for it. Many observers thought her unwillingness to serve out her term would be fatal to her ambitions, but the fact that governance did not suit her, she resigned as governor back in July, has become a kind of credential. Ms. Palin still gets a session in the media spanking machine every time she does anything, but the disapproval seems to further cement the support of her loyalists. Ms. Palin may or may not be qualified to represent America around the world, but she certainly represents vast swaths of the American public and has a lucrative new career to show for it. If we don't see why, then maybe we deserve the lamestream media label she likes to give us. Let's just start around the horn with some quick first impressions. First impressions, gut reactions. Theo, you first. Do you like the Sarah Palin package?
Well, it depends, Steve. What am I meant to do with this package? As Abraham Lincoln would say, for people who like that sort of thing, I think that's the sort of thing that they would like. I like Sarah Palin well enough. She seems like a decent enough person. Her family are nice enough people. And as the New York Times piece pointed out, she's certainly been able to capitalize off the fame that she had. I don't think that leaving her post as the governor of Alaska was fatal to her ambitions if her ambition was to make an awful lot of money and become a media star. She has the right to do that, the right to pursue happiness. I'm fairly certain I read that somewhere. I think it's great. In terms of whether that package should translate into the most powerful office in the world, I'm from Missouri on that. I'm not convinced that she's the right person to be the leader of the free world, if we still call the presidency that.
Danielle Crittenden, what say you?
I think that article says she's very much become a personality, and you either, as I've discovered as we've all discovered in dealing with her, that you either love her or you hate her, but that's not good for a politician. You can't love or hate a politician. She needs to be a unifier. She's been very divisive, works great for a personality, but does not work great for a politician. And I would argue with one thing that the New York Times article said, when it said that she represents vast swaths of American life or American popularity. In fact, she doesn't. Her poll numbers in the greater majority of American politics do not translate to that popularity. She is beloved by a very vocal but minority group of American voters.
Sheila Copps, you perhaps don't share her politics, but may have some understanding of what it's like to be a woman in the very high reaches of political life in your respective countries. So how do you feel about the Sarah Palin package?
Well, I think that anybody who is a student or an aficionado of politics should want to know more about Sarah Palin because, like it or not, she has been able to attract a core of supporters and thus far build on it. I think it's easier for her to be building on it when she's outside of the political mainstream because you can't criticize when you're not in a position to have to do anything. But I think she's a fascinating character persona, and the person behind the persona is probably not as well known as we might think. And that's what I'm interested in.
Well, we should talk to the guy who perhaps knows her as well as anybody here. Matthew, you wrote the book on her. What do you think?
Well, I think that New York Times article you quoted from was accurate in that it called Sarah Palin a brand. And that's certainly what she's become since she resigned the governorship in July 3, 2009. But the thing, as Danielle suggests, is that it's a niche brand. It's a brand that appeals only to a small section of the population. And whether Palin can expand her appeal has been the $50,000 question since she resigned her job. And so far, I'm not sure she's been able to do it.
John Kay, do you like the Sarah Palin package?
I don't, and I feel bad saying that because for about a month in 2008, I really, really did. She angered all the right people. She freaked out all the right people. And I think it was based on that reaction that I said, well, whoever this person is, they've got to be a quality person, because I like that. But then as I got to listen to what she was actually saying, I saw her performance in the debates, and my affection cooled a little bit. And I'll admit it, I changed my mind.
You're allowed to do that.
I'm allowed to do that, I will admit it, and that's what I'm doing here.
Theo, you were there in St. Paul at that Republican National Convention when she burst on the scene, unlike perhaps any politician we've ever seen in our lifetime. Yeah. From absolute anonymity, pretty much, except in Alaska, to massive superstar.
Yeah.
What did you think when you were there and you saw that?
That was a moment in time, Steve. The famous pit bull speech, you know, what's between a hockey monitor and a pit bull lipstick. It was fantastic. As you say, I was right there by the stage when it happened, and people on TV reacted to it, but it was a moment in time. The problem is she kept dining out on that right through the 2008 campaign. I think that's a bit of what John is alluding to. And I think John makes a good point when he says, look, you know, she made all the right enemies. I like that Dennis Miller line when she says, I like Sarah Palin because too many people I don't respect hate her. I think that translates pretty well. But just because Bill Maher and David Letterman make fun of you, it doesn't mean you should be president of the United States. Look, it's a good start, but it doesn't necessarily, there's more to the job than making the right enemies.
Sure. Danielle, do you think she's authentic?
What does authentic mean? Is she, I mean, I think one of the great things that I love about the American political system is when you've gone through that political ringer of a presidential campaign, people say it's superficial or it relies a lot on, you know, image and things. But in fact, I think in the end you get a very good perception of people. You see them in debates, you see them in every sort of type of situation. And Sarah Palin, I agree with Jonathan Kay, that when she came out of the gate, Jonathan Kay's actually opinion was with most, you know, a large population, especially Republican voters. They loved her, and women loved her. She was like this frontierswoman, woman, you know, baby on one hip, and even better, a baby, you know, special needs baby. She didn't abort, so that played really well with Right to Life. She's got gun on the other hip, and she spoke to a certain idea of American character, that we all love that idea. The trouble was it really didn't translate into reality, and that she lost. One of the things that we forget is in that first month of her campaign, her ratings shot up, but then they dropped precipitously among women. And while men continue to love her, and we can see why they do, she's an incredibly attractive, sexy woman, women sort of got very skeptical and withdrew their support, and that remains true among Republican women today.
Geez, Danielle, I'm so disappointed that you think men only love her because she's gorgeous.
Yeah.
I'm not
stinging indictment on all of us.
That, but you have to admit there's a certain appeal. Look, I love Todd Palin. I was all for him being. I've often thought we should be able to mix up the candidates so we could vote for Todd Palin as first lady or spouse.
First dude.
Then we could vote for someone else as the vice president.
Yeah, John Kay.
Well, I'm appalled by Danielle's lookism. You know, Danielle, I'm glad you said that. So we can get it out there. Look,
well, I'm impressed, John. Your support. You're a man willing to say you fell off when you didn't feel she intellectually rose or whatever.
And the other thing is you don't see that many ugly presidents.
That's true. But so if I could just jump in on...
It's an issue for women.
Could I jump in on the authenticity thing just for a second?
Go.
Because a lot of people talk about that. I actually would say she's very authentic in several respects. When I saw her speak in Nashville a couple of months ago at a Tea Party convention, I noticed that the point in her speech when the crowd really responded was when she talked about her special needs child. Mm-hmm. This was Tea Party convention was largely pro-life crowd. And you want to talk about authenticity, this is someone who has lived her pro-life values. This is someone who has lived her religious values. And to me, that is authentic. To have a child, and to have a son in the infantry, fighting overseas, to me, that is part of lived authenticity. And you can't take that away from her.
Yeah,
that's not a punchline.
I wonder if I could have, let me just get Sheila to comment on that way there, because you know, you like Sarah Palin had a child while, you know, a politician. And you know, we remember those times and how tough that was on you and a lot of the stuff you had to go through at that time. She had a special needs child while she was a politician. Does she get some extra props from you for that?
Well, at the time I thought, you know, good on you, and I was appalled at the fact that there were all kinds of questions attached to her legitimacy as a vice presidential candidate, because she should be home looking after her kid, and that was sort of a very interesting part of the campaign. I think she started off authentic. The choices that she's made since she left the governorship have led more to a branding, and I think it's a kind of a caricature going to work for the Fox News network and the kind of nature of the job that she's doing is certainly getting her name out there. But if she does have future political ambitions, her one time or her previous authenticity, I think, has been replaced a little bit by a kind of a Sarah Palin. It's kind of like Oprah Winfrey, Sarah Palin brand.
Theo.
I want to stick up for the great Danielle Crittenden and her lookism, as Jonathan Kay called it, because frankly, politics has been uncharitably described as show business for ugly people. And let's not deny it. When you have someone who is
There aren't that many ugly people in presidential positions. Name me one ugly president.
Listen, that's a question I'm not prepared
come
for.
on, we got to go back to the pre-TV age. I think we could find some etchings.
Exactly so. I don't think John Adams came up with his own calendar. How about that? But here's the point. When you have someone who's photogenic, who has a compelling story that we've talked about with Trigg and the rest, but also, as I say, is photogenic, looks good on camera, comes across, and is a compelling speaker, even to a relatively esoteric sliver of America, you're going to have a story that's got legs, whether she chooses to go for more public office or whether she just chooses to make some money off it, which is what she's done so far. So
no, I'm agreeing with you.
Danielle.
I'm agreeing with you on the lookism. My point is that the lookism.
Steve, 1 second, guys. We're going to have. Let me get Sheila first, and then Matthew.
I was just going to say that I agree with you on the lookism. I think there is a double standard, and she's unfortunately been a victim of that as well, because there are lots of very good-looking men who've aspired to and achieved public office, and nobody's accused them of getting votes because they're good-looking.
Scott Brown, hello.
Well,
anyway, moving along. Matthew, go ahead.
I would say the looks are almost completely ancillary to how we view Sarah Palin, right? I mean, she's always looked the way she does, and yet over the past year and a half or so, her approval ratings have gone down. So, you know, her unfavorability rating is at 50% now. Her favorable rating is at 35%. It's not looks. What it is qualifications. And what Sarah Palin has always had to do is prove to the American people, the independents in America in particular, that she's qualified and has the capacities to serve in high office. And she's been unable to do that. And the problem for her is that her resignation from the governorship made that job all so much harder. So that's why it's hard to see her reaching for higher office in the future.
Matthew, follow up on that with this, if you would. And I don't want you to read any tone into this question. It's a very neutral question. I mean it just as I'm asking it. Is she smart?
I think she's very smart. I think she's clearly as smart as Joe Biden, who made more gaffes in that vice presidential debate than she did. I also think that she has forms of intelligence that go unappreciated among the people who write newspapers and work on TV shows. These are forms of intelligence about judgment, about savvy. I don't think anyone would deny that she's extremely politically savvy or savvy when it comes to her career. And I think she has a certain moral intelligence that comes, yes, from her faith, in which she's able to make moral judgments. And when you look at Sarah Palin's career, what you see is a politician who every step of the line has based her politics on moral judgments of the scene around her. Not necessarily an understanding of the finer niceties of policy, but a sense that there's right and wrong, and what the people in power should do is stand up for right against wrong. That's Sarah Palin, and that's a form of intelligence as well.
Danielle, you want to follow up on that? Is she smart?
Yeah, I do, because there's a difference between being smart and being informed. And I totally agree with Matthew. That was just you speaking, right?
Yeah.
She's as clever as the next person. And what I really disliked about this whole debate about Sarah Palin was that the minute you criticized her and saying, I don't think she's qualified for the job, well, you were immediately branded an elitist, and you went to some elite college, and you were just, overlooking the whole Horatio Alger story that Americans love, and many presidents, including, people like Ronald Reagan, their backgrounds have come, these very hard scrabble backgrounds. They've overcome incredible obstacles. Great American story. We love that. But when you applied it to Sarah Palin, or when you said, I still don't think she's up to par, you got completely criticized for being some elite snob. And I think she's like, she hasn't been informed, and that's been scarily on view in those debates. Contra Sheila Copps, I think she got a huge boost through her looks. Unlike Hillary, who had to work for every single point she got. Hillary's, not an unattractive woman, but she's not like, Sarah Palin. Sarah Palin got a huge pass, not least because of her looks. And then when she fell down on the debates, you know, people, her support went away.
Theo,
but
and
I
then
don't think she's been informed, and that's been her huge problem.
Let me get Theo, then John.
Look, Steve, I don't care if she's as smart as Joe Biden. What kind of compelling campaign slogan is that? Smart as Joe Biden. I don't care about that.
That's right.
Life isn't always counterintuitive. I began this discussion by mentioning Abraham Lincoln. Just because people hate you, that doesn't mean you're Abraham Lincoln. And just because people call you a dummy, that doesn't make you Ronald Reagan. I will say this, though. Let's say she is smart. Let's say that Barack Obama, everyone's made it their business for the past several years as a preamble to ever discussing him, saying he's the most brilliant man since Einstein and the greatest speaker since Demosthenes. I don't see it, but let's say that's true for a second. I would say, I think Matthew made the point, judgment and wisdom are vastly more important than raw smarts. You can't put in what God's left out. Right. It doesn't matter how smart you are. You can be the smartest guy in the world and come to the wrong conclusions, and if you're president of the United States, that can be pretty damaging.
Okay, but has she demonstrated judgment, intelligence, being informed?
No, she hasn't. She's done it in as much as she's made a career of herself, and she's made a great merchandising enterprise. But in terms of the sand to be the President of the United States, as I said at the outset, no, not yet.
John Kay?
I'm going to link her intelligence, which I respect, and her looks, which I respect, in one package. I think people make a big deal about how attractive she is. I think what matters more is that she looks like the girl next door. And this is part of her marketing. When I talk to people in the Tea Party movement, for instance, about her, what they like about Sarah Palin is that she reflects a certain aspect of America. She reflects the America of wooden churches, of state fairs, of basketball tournaments, cotton candy. You know, Alaska, people have a certain idea of Alaska. It's sort of, you know, the last frontier of American wholesomeness. It's not like that. It's actually one big oil-producing state. But it's, so there's this image out there, and her looks and the savvy she's had to exploit what people want to project on her. A lot of what people criticize about Sarah Palin is what others project on her. And she's savvy enough to have ridden that into a media career.
Sheila Copps, based on what you know of her, do you think she is a person of substance?
I think she is street smart savvy, and I believe that you're going to be hearing from her for a very long time. I don't think she's substantial enough to be a presidential candidate.
And why do you make that judgment?
Well, because I think if you look at where she went after her loss, she was in a very good position, I think, with the right choices to kind of reach out to those people who aren't necessarily her top supporters, to win back the Jonathan Kays and also to add a whole new cadre. But she chose, with the kind of media path that she's taken, to be more of a commentator than a political leader. And I think that was. Financially, she's going to do very well by it, but I think from a political point of view, it was a kiss of death.
Matthew, you know, she loves this word mavericky, and I want to just ask you a little bit about her so-called outsider status right now. How important is that to her appeal, in your view?
Well, I think it's extremely important to the people that she appeals to, which is the Tea Party crowd, which is a crowd that have been left out of a lot of elite conversations here in Washington, D.C., over whether it's the size of government or health care or immigration policy in the United States. That matters very much. But of course, she's always been an outsider. She's always been someone who has been underestimated and discounted. And she's always challenged the power structure, whether that was the Republican Party in Alaska, whether that was the city council in Wasilla, her hometown. And now she's trying to challenge the power structure in Washington. The problem, I think, as Sheila suggests, is that there are two types of politicians. There are broadcasters and there are narrowcasters. And Palin had the opportunity in September of 2008 to be a broadcaster, to speak, I think, for really add a new voice to the American political conversation, someone who's never really been there, the mother of a Down syndrome child, the mother of a young man who was about to be deployed to Iraq, someone who did not go to an Ivy League school, someone who had not born into political prominence. What's happened since the election and since her resignation is that she's increasingly become a narrowcaster. She's really attuning herself to the Tea Party crowd, to the Fox News Channel crowd. And those are a lot of people, but they don't make an electoral majority. And so that's why, again, I think it's hard to see a path for her to high office in the United States.
Theo?
First, on a point of information, did she ever actually use the word mavericky, or is that just a Tina Fey?
No, I think that was said about her.
I think it might be. That's a very good point that Matthew makes, although I would say the Fox News crowd, and you should know this, I think, Matthew, because you've been on there, that's bigger than just a segment of America. Generally speaking, Canadians watch CNN and Americans watch Fox News. It's just a fact in terms of cable news, so it's not like it's a small segment down there. But you know what, in terms of broadcast and narrowcast and the studying, I don't want to hear about someone who has to study for 2 years to run for president. It's either part of you. You either prepare for your life and you read policy and you are politically interested and a curious person and you prepare and hope and maybe someday your chance comes, or you aren't. But it's not a midterm high school chem exam, for goodness sake. If it's part of you, it's part of you, and you have the natural chops to be a political leader. If you have to cram, it's artificial in the first place. And like I said, you can't put in what God's left out. And in her case, I just don't think she has the gravitas on a natural level that she should be leading the free world.
Go ahead, Danielle.
Can I say I want to speak because I totally agree with what Theo just said. And this whole idea that she's mavericky. I got to see her speak in Hamilton, 2 or 3 weeks ago when she was giving a paid speech to a charity group. And what really struck me about her was, and I've seen many politicians speak. I've been at dinners where Reagan spoke and Thatcher spoke, and these are the people she's always held up, with. And what really struck me about her was that every question, there was going to be a Q&A session, but every question had to be vetted in advance. Nobody was allowed to approach the dais. That she was in this bubble of protection. And you think, when you're in Washington politics, or you're going to be in the president, or you're like Hillary Clinton, if it was as if not just what she feared someone was going to ask her, but she feared her ability to answer it. And that's not someone you can even throw on Meet the Press, let alone run for presidential office. And when she's at her best, it was like the convention speech, or when she's been on The Tonight Show, she's really good when she's scripted. But when she's not scripted, I can tell you, watching her speak for 45 minutes was one of the most painful political speech moments of my life. I described it as watching like a carpool mother with Tourette syndrome. I mean, she was just all over the place, going from her baby to small business and taxes and starting up the economy. And it wasn't even as clever as a Tina Fey sketch. And you think this person has not, in 45 minutes, offered a single solution, a single idea. It is these strung together phrases at which we are not allowed to ask any questions.
Okay, but let me put this to Sheila Copps, though. Sheila, that's our hometown, Sheila Copps, where she sold out the joint at $250 a ticket. They gave her a huge standing ovation on the way in, and some people who paid extra dough got to have their picture taken with her. She may not be running for anything, but she knows how to sell.
Well, she is. She's got that media halo, and she's a political star who doesn't necessarily have a political future. I think, interestingly, when Danielle was there, I did speak to a couple of people who were there, and they told me the same thing. It was kind of a stream of consciousness speech where you really didn't draw any conclusions, and you couldn't really figure out what the point was at the end of it. So she had an opportunity. And this goes to the issue of narrowcasting versus broadcasting. If she wants to go to higher office, she's got to build a broader coalition and not simply go to the people that are already on her side. And I don't see her doing that.
John Kay.
I saw her speak, as I said, in Nashville, and it was the famous Palm Pilot speech. That's where they were asking her questions, and she had them written down in her hand. And they weren't even actually very hard questions. They were like, why are you so great? Will you run for president? That sort of thing. So that part didn't impress me. However, the fact that she jumped from point to point to point, I don't think that's a function of who she is. I think that's a function of the crowd she's talking to. When she's talking to a crowd, everybody at a Tea Party convention already knows they want to pump more oil. They already know that America is the greatest country in the world. They already know X, Y, and Z. All she has to do is say a sentence or two in an applause line, and then she moves on from point to point. I don't think that's a reflection of her. I think it's a reflection of the crowd she's talking to. But also, I should say, sorry, if I may just add that it's also worth noting that Sarah Palin's appeal is to a country where power is out of fashion. I actually don't think it was such a bad move for her to quit the governorship of Alaska. At the Tea Party conventions I've been to, basically the two names you hear are Ronald Reagan, who's dead, and Sarah Palin, who's out of power, and people like those leaders because they're out of power. So I actually don't think the narrowcasting strategy is that bad in an era when power is so out of fashion.
Go ahead, Danielle.
Well, it depends if you're
looking
for power or not.
Yeah.
Well, when the
It's
economy...
bad if you're trying to win an election.
Yeah.
And it's bad if you're trying to build a party that is going to require centrist votes. But I think she's more like, I think when you say they just want to hear those lines, when I was watching her in Hamilton, I thought, you know, she's like the traveling company of Les Mis, that the people who have shown up here, they want to hear certain lines. They'll be very happy with it. They're not there to hear, and it was a very non-political crowd too. But as you say, she's playing to a kind of audience that is really happy just to see her in person, just to hear her make her key phrases, and then they go home, you know, maybe they buy the book or the t-shirt. But as a broad political movement, as something that's going to challenge the Democrats, as something that's going to build the Republican Party, she ain't it.
Matthew, let me bring you in to address that kind of narrowcasting versus broadcasting issue, because I gather your point was if she'd wanted to, she could have taken the next step and become a broadcaster to a broader range of people. Does it seem to you, based on your knowledge of her, whether she's going to be content to be kind of the Ross Perot of this generation, appeal, narrowcast, if you like, to that 20% who absolutely adore her, but you know, you can't win with 20% alone? What do you think?
No, you can't. But I mean, we should point out that even though Palin has been identified with the Tea Party movement, in fact, I think in many ways she's trying to identify herself with it, Republicans are closing the gap down here with independents. Gallup came out with a poll recently that showed that the partisan ID advantage that Democrats have had almost been erased, and that was the result of independents returning to the Republican Party. So even though I think voters are sophisticated enough to say that, well, with Sarah Palin, I have real doubts about her capacities to lead the country as president in that high office, but nonetheless, perhaps the policy she's speaking about and the values that she's standing for are things that I can support for other candidates. And in some sense, then, Palin is more of a media sideshow to what's really happening in the United States right now, which is a very real cultural debate about the size and scope of the federal government and what role it should play in all of our lives.
Theo.
That's a good point, because if you want to be president of the United States, no matter what an advantage you start with, you got to want it. You have to go out there and broadcast. You have to have a broad appeal. I think all of us have sort of spoken to that. Take someone like Bobby Kennedy, who nobody knows what would have happened, but I think if he hadn't been assassinated, he would have been elected president in 1968. And I tell you what, he was out there shaking hands, talking to everybody on a fearless basis. Sarah Palin comes to Hamilton, as Danielle put forward, and her speech is like Monty Burns' birthday party with jackboots and billy clubs. Don't come near the speaker. So you have to branch out. So what do we conclude? We conclude that she's never going to have the broad appeal. For whatever reason, she doesn't care to or she can't branch out, but she will be a kingmaker and important. Why she's chosen to waste her considerable endorsement power on, say, Rand Paul is another topic that we can have. But the Republicans have a deep bench. Matthew was right. When it comes to the congressional elections in 2010, they're already ahead, well ahead on the generic ballot for the midterm elections. And in 2012, they're smart guys, whether you like them or not. Newt Gingrich, Mitch Daniels, Mitt Romney, Paul Ryan. Why do we need this person? Why should Sarah Palin jump the queue of people who, frankly, are really serious people, who I don't think Barack Obama relishes running against in 2012?
Because she's a star, she gets attention, she raises money. How's that for
well,
three
how's that going to do in a several-month campaign and 3 debates? I mean, I don't think it's going to last.
Danielle?
If I can throw in also, when we were talking about that she's, although she's a sideshow, she's underscoring this debate that, you know, the difference between conservatives and liberals, where we care about, you know, how the process and governance, and liberals care about, you know, courts and going through other means. But it doesn't matter. I would love, you know, we'd all love to have that debate. But as someone who is working within the conservative movement as a writer, blogger, whatever, is the sideshow is the main show right now in Republican politics. And the Sarah Palin and the Glenn Beck and the Michael, you know, Levin and the Rush Limbaugh are so loud, and Fox News, and so destructive to that kind of debate. And that's what's distressing, that we are not having the debates we should, that would get us more people, more centrists, real power. And these candidates who we just named are having to kind of move away from their more serious or more centrist populist ideas in order to cater to that very loud but vocal minority.
Okay, Sheila Copps, 5 minutes to go here. Let me try this on with you. 1 second, Matthew. I only got 5 minutes left, and I want to try this with Sheila Copps, because Sarah Palin has so far very successfully kind of thumbed her nose at conventional wisdom, which is to say, if you want to compete for a big job, you usually stay in the smaller job. You know, forgive me for making these comparisons again, but you ran for Ontario Liberal leader and National Liberal leader as a sitting politician. She quit her job as a sitting politician, the governor of Alaska. Presumably everybody thinks to run for a bigger job. Does that make sense in your view?
Well, no, that doesn't make sense, and even if she is a kingmaker, because that 20% wedge that she's driven into the heart of the Republican Party can be a very important wedge. Just ask John McCain, who's looking for her support now in his own fight. That's key, but I think the choices that she's made since she left the governorship have also dictated that she does not have a future in active federal politics. But I don't know Washington. I would think from a Canadian perspective, if she were going to, if you want to play in politics, you have to be in politics. You're not going to be able to do that from the sidelines.
Matthew?
Yeah, it's hard to see in terms of Sarah Palin, but I would just say this. There's no question the GOP has moved right since February 2009 when they all opposed the Obama stimulus package. And since that time, they've won elections in Virginia, in New Jersey, in Massachusetts. The independents have come to them. They're leading in the generic ballot, and they're set to score historic gains in the November elections. So maybe moving right is not such a bad thing after all.
No, but those candidates were centrist
too.
as well. No, the party...
Well, then, and Sarah Palin was around.
Look how
Sarah
Scott,
Palin was
no,
around, and
Scott
she didn't
Brown
scare anyone
campaigned.
away. Yeah, well,
Sorry?
she was still
I missed
there,
that
Rush
one.
Limbaugh was still there, and Scott Brown still won.
Yeah, they're still there, but the candidates who were winning were not campaigning on Sarah Palin /
But they're not
Rush Limbaugh.
hurting you. They're
Okay,
not
let me
hurting
try
the
this.
candidates as much as you might think.
Let me try this with John Kay here. Maybe the joke is on us in the lamestream media, as she likes to call it, because she is, after all, next to the president, the biggest star in American politics today. She can raise a ton of money. She can, you know, the oxygen in every room is all on her. And she's getting rich. And maybe she will or maybe she won't in 2012, but that doesn't seem to matter right now.
It's hard to predict what's going to happen in a country where Glenn Beck is taken seriously as a political commentator. Two states, Florida, where Crist went from having a 30-point lead in the Republican race to having to run as an independent.
This is the governor, Charlie Crist.
Yeah, and he's a guy who basically facing a massive revolt on the right. And you look at Arizona, which in terms of its Arizona law and the populist politics playing there, and McCain's trouble, I mean, those two states are a sign of a really freaked out right wing in the United States. And like I said, Glenn Beck, Rush Limbaugh, I mean, who knows what's going to happen? It's not beyond the realm of possibility that Sarah Palin could have a future in that United States.
You like Rush Limbaugh and Glenn Beck, don't you, Theo?
Well,
they're your kind of guys.
I don't, yeah. Well, look, this is politics 101, you guys. You win or lose elections based on contrasts. When Republicans try to be moderate and centrist, they get what they got in November of 2008. When they decide to offer the electorate a contrast, doesn't mean everyone's freaked out necessarily, but it certainly gives them something to vote for. If you're neither fish nor fowl, you win no hearts. So you're not going to win any elections either. So they're going to pick somebody, I believe, as Matthew was saying, right of center for 2012. I think the reason that the GOP is posed to have strong gains this November is because they're going to run on the right. That's what we saw in Massachusetts and Virginia and New Jersey, and that's what works.
Okay. That's got to be the last word tonight. Theo, like the playoff beard. It's looking good on you.
Thanks.
Appreciate that. Can I thank our guests out of town? Danielle Crittenden, contributing blogger for the Huffington Post and FromForum.com. Matthew Continetti, the Weekly Standard, the author of The Persecution of Sarah Palin. They were both in Washington. Sheila Copps, the former Deputy Prime Minister in our Ottawa studios. Jonathan Kay from the National Post. Theo Caldwell, Toronto Sun and National Post here in Toronto. Thanks so much, everyone.